Today I wanted to talk a little bit more in depth about the difference between tapering and resting before your race. Now, when you taper, you do implement more rest, but when you rest, it doesn't necessarily mean you're tapering. I often hear athletes describing tapering as more of an afterthought, like maybe on a Wednesday before their upcoming Saturday event, they just all of a sudden decide that they are going to taper. And I would define that as maybe they're choosing to maybe add a few days of rest between Wednesday and their Saturday event. Now, both tapering and resting are planned out, but I say that a tapering is a more thought out, developed plan leading into your or most important race of the season, where it's methodical reduction in training volume while maintaining training intensity, and it's planned within your training year. So if you have a race, say on June 1st, the first thing I would do is, depending on the length of the race, I would plan whether you're going to have a 3, 5, 7, 14, up to 21 day taper, and then I would plan the build, and then I would plan the base, and then I would plan the preparation. So I like to work backwards when I'm doing the overall annual training plan for an athlete as well as myself. Now, a rest, let's talk about planning a rest. I like to plan rest weeks before an athlete's B events. So less important than their A race, but they do want to go into this a little bit rested. It allows them to see how they do mentally and physically with a little bit of rest, but it's only a few days, not more than a 5-day rest week, and I do maintain some intensity. Sometimes a rest week isn't planned out. Sometimes a rest week is forced because you get sick or injured, and usually if you have forced rest, that's probably what your body needed and you'll come back stronger race day. Sometimes if you have forced rest, it's probably because you weren't planning any recovery periods before the week of rest. And sometimes you decide to jump into an event last minute. Maybe it's a Wednesday and you decide to jump into a Saturday race, and you haven't planned out that rest week, you haven't planned out any taper, and you just kind of go and do it. I would define that more as a C race, where you are still practicing some pacing, nutrition strategies in preparation for the all-important A race. So generally, when you plan a taper, it's a reduction in training volume of 20 to 60%, and it's definitely an exponential reduction in training volume, where you maintain your training frequency. How often are you swimming, biking, running, strength training, or anything else you're doing, but you're really decreasing the volume. And you may even bump up the intensity, but the intensity also, the amount of intensity relative to the amount of volume or duration still decreases, because if you're decreasing volume, you're going to decrease intensity with that, but you may even bump up intensity depending on the nature of the event and how long the event you're going to do. How long you taper and what you do during the taper is so dependent on what you did during that build phase or that race preparation, race specific phase. So it's so important to have a good race preparation build phase that allows you to plan out a taper, because there's definitely an art of tapering, and it's such a huge component of how successful or not you will be in your race. I learned the hard way. I've been doing this sport for almost 30 years, and I used to never taper because I didn't really know what that was back in the day. And so there were many events that I just struggled with. I was more often than not usually really fatigued going into the race, and I would be like, well, wonder why I didn't perform well. Well, you know, fast forward to now, it's just because I didn't taper enough, and my tapers are always based on the volume of training I do before the taper. So I hope this helps you understand a little bit more about tapering versus resting. And to quote the growth equation, remember that rest plus stress equals growth. So, let's redefine that. Stress plus rest equals growth. The stress is the volume of training, then you rest, and that's where you're going to grow and perform and shine and do really well in your race. Now, a few other things I wanted to talk about, the reduction in volume and that taper period is sometimes, especially the first week, it's important to structure this because you may feel lousy, you may start to have some phantom pains, you may get a cold or just a little bit of a sickness, head cold, something like that. You may start to feel a knee issue, a hip issue, an ankle issue. It's kind of all normal to feel these types of pains is because your body is almost kind of going in shock. It's going from this volume and intensity level that you were to slowly decreasing it, and your body's trying to repair itself and rebuild itself. Your body repairs and rebuilds during the recovery period, and that's why it's important to plan recovery periods and the general overall picture of what you're doing in the plan. And it's a good thing because it's just a sign that your body is rebuilding and resetting. So don't feel like you're not going to taper because you don't want to have those feelings. It's totally normal. And it's totally normal to feel great and to never get sick or injured and just to feel awesome during the taper period. Everyone's going to respond to a taper differently. And that's why it's important to try to incorporate tapers at various times of the year just to see how your body responds so you don't freak out. I'd love to hear if you have any advice on the taper to share with others. Either comment below or join the chatter in our T2 Endurance group, and I hope you make it a great day.